Right, hi, good afternoon. So my name is Nuala Zahedeh. I'm a retired professor of economic and social history, and I'm now an honorary research fellow here at the Wilberforce Institute. And I'm delighted to be welcoming you to the first lecture in the 2024-25 season, held in association with the with the museums with the whole museums. Although it's also with much sadness that that this honour should have fallen upon me, because of course it should have fallen on Trevor Bernard, the previous director of the Institute, who very sadly died on the 19th of July, and whom I sorely miss both in a professional and personal capacity. So I'm very honoured but very sad to be here. The annual Alderman Sidney Smith Lecture was endowed by the prominent local politician, the same name, in the early 1970s, with the express purpose of promoting labour and social history, so the core issues of WISE. And after a period of abeyance after 1988, the lecture was revived soon after the Institute was founded. So it's revived in 2010, and it's become an important annual fixture in the Institute's programme. It's a pleasure to introduce this year's lecturer, Dr. Heather Cateau, who was trained in history at the University of the West Indies at the St. Augustine campus in Trinidad, where she's now a senior lecturer and also Dean of the Faculties of Humanities and Education. She's also held fellowships in universities in the US and the UK, so the universities of Iowa, Cambridge, St. Andrews. Heather specialises in the study of plantation systems and in comparative systems of enslavement, and has published widely in this area, including co-editing a number of important volumes such as Capitalism and Slavery 50 Years Later with Selwyn Carrington, which was important because it presented a very valuable West Indian perspective on the Eric Williams thesis. And it's soon to be supplemented by another edited volume, Capitalism and Slavery 75 Years On. And hopefully soon, well, not too soon, but hopefully in another 25 years, Capitalism and Slavery 100 Years On. She's also contributed to turning the Caribbean gaze beyond the usual Eurocentric focus on the plantation system in the on tradition, reinterpreting the Caribbean experience, which she edited with Rita Pemberton. She's currently working on a very novel oral history project, Voices of the Past, which seeks to capture historical experiences before they're lost, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that later. Today, Heather returns to her core interest in the working of the Caribbean plantation systems, with what I expect will be a revealing look at change through the eyes of enslaved workers, white employees, and the workings of the plantation operations in the period between 1750 and 1834, in a lecture entitled The New Negro Business, the Enslavement System in the Caribbean in the Age of Revolution. Thank you.
Good evening. Let me start by saying it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Nuala. It's great to see a familiar face. It's great to see all of you all. And I am pleased to share some of my thoughts and ideas in my recent research with you all this evening. I can't start this evening, however, without acknowledging the contribution made by Trevor, not just to history, Caribbean history, but to historians like me. I recall I last met him at a workshop in Birmingham, and we sat next to each other. And of course, he asked me about my work, and I had just these ideas whirling around in my head. And I told him all these confused ideas. And he said, "So Heather, you're working on?" And he summed it up perfectly. and then I said to myself, "Yes, Heather, That is what you're working on. So let me start by saying thank you, Trevor. And I'm going to share some of those thoughts that I discussed with you this evening. My topic, the new Negro business, in quotation marks, the enslavement system in the Caribbean in the age of revolution. I'm going to start with this advertisement. It's an advertisement for the sale and let of enslaved persons. I want to stress, sales are to be sold and they are to be let. I'm starting with this because in a real sense, it captures what I want to talk about today, what is going to be at the heart of my discussion. And in a real sense, I'm simply talking about how we got to this point. So that enslaved persons are not just being sold, they are also being let or rented or hired. To do this, I'm going to start by talking about change. Though often regarded as an entity that shied away from change, I want to suggest that the plantation was constantly changing in response to both internal and external developments. Its survival for 4 centuries in an industry that was at the center of international trading links, which were connected to Europe, meant that the plantations were also shaped by all the major revolutionary developments of the time period. It adapted to a changing world and it adjusted according to changes in the Caribbean context. This shaped a complex internal mix of developments, which must themselves be regarded as revolutionary in a period of enslavement. They not only transformed economic and social relationships on the plantations in the West Indies, but also economic and social roots in Britain. 2 of its major components, the plantation and enslavement, persisted for centuries because they were reshaped and integrated in new ways as part of functional mechanisms to allow production to continue, just as the world itself was being reshaped economically, politically, and socially through revolutionary developments. This was a two-way process. In this complex flow, the region also shaped the new world, the new age that was taken form. Moved by both external and internal motivations, there were adaptations and innovations which evolved to shape the plantation complex. In reality, the individual dimensions of the system were all very connected. And in some ways, they were part of the holistic nature of the transition that transpired as the world was being reshaped in the 18th and 19th centuries. On the surface, it looked as if nothing had changed, as if the typical plantation with its rigid economic and social hierarchy remained intact. I contend, however, that while the overall framework and principles may not have changed, fundamental aspects of labor acquisition, labor management, both black and white, as well as processing and manufacturing, had changed. Without even being fully aware of what was going on, Simon Taylor, the resident Jamaican sugar tycoon, began to use the term, quote unquote, the new Negro business. He was not the only one. There were changes taking place in the Caribbean in the plantation complex. The operational context by the second half of the 18th century was becoming increasingly difficult. Enslaved workers were more expensive to purchase. This was coupled with the failure of natural increase within the enslaved population. There was increasing volatility on the plantations. Several changes demanded improvements in the treatment of the enslaved population. The business environment was plagued by increasing costs of inputs. There were periods of fluctuation and depression in the sugar industry. Much of the region suffered from soil depletion and other climate and environmental challenges. And of course, there was increasing absenteeism as planters returned to Britain. All this coincided with philosophical, political, economic, social, and cultural changes which characterized the age of revolution. The stage was set with a backdrop of the Enlightenment, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and the all-encompassing Industrial Revolution. These all created political instability, new ways of thinking, and new economic pathways, and also changed the material and technological environment. Two of the most commonly cited examples of the planters' lack of progressiveness and adherence to traditional techniques and methods have been that enslaved labor, as well as the technological environment, militated against progress and were becoming outmoded. In this context, I want to re-examine the enslavement and technological systems this evening. First, there's need to address the tendency to refer to enslaved labor as a cheap source of labor. Prices actually continue to rise substantially, particularly after the abolition of the slave trade. By the late 18th and early 19th century, the price of an enslaved person had risen to as much as 132 to 150 pounds. This presentation argues that the enslavement system experienced adaptations which made it compatible with substantial technological advances made between 1750 and 1830. The changes that took place can be divided into three distinct groups: agricultural changes, technological advancements, and changes related to the labor force. Plantation papers reveal a steady mix of experimentation and innovation. Magazine Berg and Pat Hudson describe a two-way flow of inventive, adaptive activity between the colonies and the metropole, and they talk about a spirit of improvement that took hold of the region. New concepts of agriculture and mill production were actively considered quite early. David Wood describes a new generation of elite landlords who turned to plantation experts to help with reinventing the technologies of slavery. The process was heavily influenced by developments in Britain, and many absentee landlords like Lord Penrhyn and Joseph Barham were at the center of these changes. However, there was also an internal momentum. Berg and Hudson noted that plantation innovation did not just happen. Planters, managers, and Black overseers sought it out. They made it workable, often with the assistance of highly skilled labor. The most common method for the dissemination of information and ideas were orally, and also sharing experiences and public demonstrations of successes or failures. Edward Long describes experiments in agriculture, which were conducted on small pieces of land, which were specially designated for that purpose. He was also in support of the use of the plow and noted that it had been tried and tested in Jamaica. However, it was perhaps the manufacture of sugar that was given most attention. There was experimentation with improving sugar mills with the application of water and steam power. Contemporary sources refer to experimentation with Dr. Higgins' plan, Worry's method, Boulton and Watt's steam engine, Brent and Garnett's mill, Siddon's plan, a rotative mill, Mr. Ryder's wood iron pans, Cummins engines, as well as many other trials. In 1718, George Fairburn, an attorney in Grenada, begged the planters to consider that the steam mill might be of advantage to the plantation. In the same year, Christian Long in Jamaica wrote to Andrew Aberdeen, revealing that his inquiries had showed that the cost of a sugar mill steam engine was between £1,800 and £2,000. He was advised to send one out immediately. Thomas Farrer, attorney to Lord Penrhyn, asked him to delay sending out an engine for Kings Valley Plantation because he was erecting a new mill on the estate on a principle lately discovered for grinding canes right there in the parish of St. Anne's. Similar examples can be found throughout the region. There was also experimentation with limestone, rum production, and cotton. There was much discussion and correspondence was shared between owners and merchants in Britain. Opinions vary often. Those in the West Indies often felt that their experience should be factored into the decisions being made. Books were widely read, societies were formed, and as far as possible, demonstrations were requested. Simon Taylor insisted, and I quote, respecting Mr. Bolton until he sends out models, lets people know the premium he expects for his machines and convinces them that they will answer, he will get no encouragement here. I should think if he is so certain of success that he would wish one to be erected on an estate, even at his own expense, to be reimbursed if it should answer. He added, it will be better to see what he can do first. There are people eager to try experiments, and they will give him a fair play. The plantations were visited by many entrepreneurs to demonstrate and market innovations and inventions. Neighbors looked on with interest at what was going on around them. Thus, innovations can be classified as both endemic to the region and imported from overseas. In addition, I have focused primarily on agricultural and industrial practices. The sugar plantations in the Age of Revolution was a changed entity, but not only because of these factors. There were less visible changes within the two major working groups, the enslaved Africans and the white Europeans. Without these changes, I think the plantations would not have survived into the 19th century. Less visible, but importantly, there were also unprecedented internal intervention from white plantation workers and enslaved workers as they carved out new spaces for themselves in this new environment. The two groups of developments combined to create a constant flow of white workers who came to the Caribbean. This created an internal challenge to the traditional plantation hierarchy. And this is where I want to focus for the rest of the evening. During the Age of Revolution, the white middle managers, who could be described as a group of sojourners, consolidated themselves in the region and evolved into a group of better educated and highly skilled workers. They were very much a part of all the experimentation and innovation that characterized the environment. Simon Taylor complained that, and I quote, all the young men that come out are so fond of new plants and experiments that they play the devil with all our properties. Bookkeepers, overseers, attorneys, they seem to be a changed group of people by the late 18th century. Many of the men coming onto the region were now more educated and several were highly skilled. They were now, as a contemporary said, expensive and magnificent works that served to exhibit the skill of carpenters and masons. The plantation complex had changed. I want to now look at some of those people who came out. So we're in the West Indies. We have changes to the plantation system, and it is creating spaces for semi-skilled and skilled workers, as well as for middle managers. What am I talking about? There are skilled workers coming out, clerks coming out, bookkeepers, overseers, and attorneys. In terms of the scale of the movement, I have an estimate from Stephen Mullen, who looks at the Scottish scenario, and he estimates that 37,000 to 46,000 Scots sojourned in the West Indies between 1750 and 1834. From the voice of a contemporary, Thomas Fraser, writing to his cousin, God help us, we have no employment for young men. A ship from Glasgow brought so many here. The truth is, we have too many here. The distinctive features of this movement, there was a continuous flow from the late 18th century to the 19th century. Most came in small vessels, in small numbers. Whelan estimates as small as 5 to 10. The statistics I have seen do not include indentured servants, do not include sojourners, people who were coming out temporarily, and many of them stayed. This is compounded by possibilities for smuggling and unmanned exit points. The rare numbers, I suggest, have the potential to be quite large. I want to stress, however, that I don't want to get into another numbers game. Numbers alone do not dictate significance. The small number of whites in the colonies makes this a very significant group. And I also argue that the nature of what they did is another source of their significance. Many of them were at first from very modest economic means. Their mindset is captured by Robert Greer. On arrival in the West Indies, he said, I am so much proposed in favor of your side of the water that I would rather see a ripe field of corn than all the sugar plantations. Yet even here, we make shift to life and are hearty and merry with our friends and laugh at those who prefer starving in a cold climate to living in this. I don't know whether we are right or wrong, but we must do our best of it so long as we are here. Their economic stories include saving and working hard, holding multiple positions, being very involved in enslavement, and sending remittances home. I argue that we need to rethink the position these men held in plantation society. I contend that the West Indies possess what I describe as a multiplier effect, which allowed them to increase the income made substantially. The first part of this multiplier effect were their annual salaries. They earned from a low of £40 to a high of £2,000. By no means were these large amounts. However, they held multiple contracts. Looking closely at some of them, Francis Grant in Jamaica managed 7 estates. That's 7 salaries. John Wilson in Demerara was reputed to manage more estates than anyone in the country. John Ross in Grenada managed 14 estates. Julian Shan in Jamaica was said to have managed over 100 properties. I really don't know if that one is possible. I want to point out that persons also held multiple bookkeeper positions, multiple overseer positions. It wasn't only the attorneys. The second part of the multiplier effect, slave ownership. And this is where I think we need to focus. Some of these men earned as much as £500 to £1,000 annually from owning enslaved workers. I suggest they earned more from hiring out enslaved workers than from their actual salaries. Donald Mackay advised, the safest and most advantageous way in which a man can use his money in this country is in Negroes who are well employed. Andrew Watson wrote home to his mother, and I think my mothers would love their sons to be speaking to them like this. Perhaps you may think I run through my salary, but I do not. I lay by something. As soon as I get a little capital, I intend to purchase some Cooper Negroes, each of whom will bring home in hire to the account of £50 clear per annum. Now, I want you to remember that these men came out with that dream of owning property. Land was not within their reach, and enslaved person was. So it was the easiest way to acquire property. Taking a closer look at them again, John Kelly in Jamaica in 1773 took home £300. That was his annual salary at Golden Grove. Added to this,
Okay. No, sorry.
And that's John Kelly's list.
Press the power.
Come on. There you go.
Okay. I'm not going to mention his name again, but the first person in that block in Jamaica took home £300 as attorney at Golden Road. That was his annual salary. Added to this, he received £566 for quote-unquote Negro hire. And Duncan Field Hall, Adrian Hamilton was paid £1,120 for his hired enslaved worker. William Iglees received £26 for a job as a carpenter. He was paid an additional £1,986 for the extended hire of his enslaved workers. And then there was Alice Clark in Jamaica. He was fired from Arnold Penn. His concern was not his salary. His concern was what would he do with his enslaved workers. This was hiring, the quote-unquote new Negro business that Simon Taylor was talking about. A shift in focus. The plantation complex was changing, owning small numbers of enslaved workers who were rented out was creating a second and very important stream of income. This is borne out when we look at data from St. Catherine and St. Mary's. There were changes in the pattern of slave ownership. In St. Catherine in 1804, of 382 masters, 252 owned between 1 and 19 enslaved persons. In St. Mary's in 1817, of 693 masters, 430 persons owned between 1 to 4 enslaved workers. With emancipation approaching, Donald McKay was worried. He said, to overseers, clerks, and tradesmen, it, meaning emancipation, is a check on their industry. For their only encouragement to live in so baneful a climate was the benefit derived from owning Negroes, their wages being hardly sufficient for the necessaries of life. Hiring was at the center of this new Negro business. More income was made from property in a small number of enslaved persons than annual salaries. There was more money to be made from enslaved labor than merely owning enslaved persons. In reality, short and long-term rentals were replacing simple ownership. Plantations now needed timely injections of a specific quantity and quality within the labor force. I just want to talk briefly about the remittances that were sent home. There was a constant stream of remittances coming back to Britain from these workers. They went to family members, creditors, boarding houses, schools, governesses, investments, and savings. The range of the values were quite wide, but I can tell you sometimes the amounts were as little as £10, and sometimes even this had to be shared. What we are seeing really is that there are two levels of business transaction. The large-scale one, with planters and merchants, that has been our focus, but also on a smaller scale, activity from clerks, overseers, attorneys, and skilled workers. I think their value and contribution has been underestimated. There are success stories, fortunes are made, properties purchased in the Caribbean and Britain. Some fulfill their dream and return home. But I think most importantly, they are improved lives on both sides of the Atlantic. I want to look at the skilled workers in particular, because they really benefited from the changes in the plantation complex. Salaries that had started off as low as 50 to 70 pounds rose to as much as 500 pounds. The demand for skilled white laborers was so high that there was a competition in the job market. In 1806, James Mitchell of Moral Estates attempted to entice away the man who attended the engine on Lord Penguin's estate to operate his own machine by offering him 500 pounds a year. These men were also instrumental for training groups of skilled workers on plantations. Skilled workmen owned and trained groups of enslaved skilled workers who they hired out as a skilled gang. By 1789, Simon Taylor boasted that he had built up a great gang of carpenters comprised of 2 groups of 8 capital hands, besides the white planter who looks after them. The complexity and impact of such changes, which were very much now at the heart of the plantation paper, is captured in this quotation from Simon Taylor. I have bought a very good mason Negro for you. The mason has a good mason who I have agreed to hire at 25 pounds, and also 3 new Negroes. I have engaged to give him 5 pounds per annum for each of the last for the first year. And I have given him 5 good masons and a boy I have at Holland, and we are to give him 50 pounds each per annum. And so with the hire of his Negroes, he will have an income of 100 pounds sterling. Now, I really had to read this several times. How do we unravel this puzzle? It is difficult to figure out what is really happening. It is difficult to make distinctions between slave and free, black and white, who owns who is hiring who. What we do know is that these are skilled workers of various levels. The key person is being hired not only for his skill, but the skilled workers he brings with him, as well as his value in training other enslaved persons. We do know that an enslaved mason was purchased. He was to be paid 25 pounds for another skilled mason that came with him. He also had 3 other workers with him, and he would receive 5 pounds each for their services. He would get an additional 50 pounds per annum, perhaps for the training of enslaved persons on another unit. He would make approximately 100 pounds a year. Enslavement had not ended. The situation was just extremely complicated. With emancipation looming, the value of skilled workers caused some concern among those who felt they should be compensated more for skilled enslaved persons. R.D. Clooney of Jamaica was moved to write the West Indian Compensation Committee in 1834. His petition was based on the claim that he was in possession of sundry valuable coppersmith and plumber Negroes, whose labor yielded a much better return than any other description of slave because of their talent and the length of time that he had taken to train them. He continues, your memorialists paid very high prices for all of them. They have cost upwards of 200 pounds sterling. He even added that they had served an apprenticeship for 2 years. We can therefore surmise that the spirit of innovation and scientific and technological improvements had led to more educated, trained, and skilled white workers. They, in turn, were even more valued because they were instrumental in passing down these skills to the enslaved population through apprenticeship periods. In many cases, they earned substantial income through their own gang of enslaved workers. These changes also impacted not only on the need for more white workers, but skilled enslaved workers were also highly valuable. They worked under a range of conditions and were provided with unexpected opportunities over the time period. Enslaved persons also own their own measures through which they in turn influence the operations of the plantations. But this is the subject for another lecture. Today, I want to concentrate on revising two narratives. The revision of the narrative of white workers and the nature of their employment and their earnings. And the second, a review of the changes in the enslavement system, which led to a complex mix of directly enslaved and enslaved hired labor. Some points to sum up. A group of more educated and skilled white workers consolidated themselves in the region. There's need to revisit the positions of bookkeepers, overseers, attorneys, and skilled white workers. The real source of their income was through ownership of smaller numbers of enslaved persons. They combined this with a hiring system which both depended on and operated right there within the plantations. More and more planters were paying for labor, even though it was enslaved labor. The story goes beyond the upper class. Smaller remittances were sent home from this group. Looking at the working and middle classes add new dimensions to the societies and groups who profited from African enslavement. The percentage of skill in both the Black and white groups was increasing. Dimensions of capitalism, industrialization, and adjusted labor relations and management were evolving right within the plantation complex. I want to end with a quotation from Nicholas Radburn and Justin Roberts. Caribbean slavery was an insidiously adaptable institution that assumed many forms to meet both specific economic demands and changing visions of the master-slave relationship. And just so that I can have the final word, I will add that by the end of the 18th century, fundamental aspects of the plantation system had changed. And these changes allowed it to persist into the 19th century and to weather the revolutionary changes that characterize the time period.